Hello and welcome back to episode 2 of the NBA with KJ, the number one NBA podcast in America right now. Someday, maybe, probably not. Today, I have a bit of an interesting video. I am a Lakers fan, as some people, the probably 3 people who watched the last episode may have picked up on. Um, I'm a Lakers fan, and now that free agency has fully been mostly over, actually. It's not fully been over. It's mostly over at this point, though. It's the 12th. It's about the end of free agency. Still got a couple guys on the market. For the most part, most teams are set and in place. The big question was who won free agency, and people were talking about the Chicago Bulls or Miami Heat or ... But really, like, for me, I think the Lakers, maybe they didn't win free agency, but they won the competition for fixing what needed fixing. So they won the off season, more or less, at least from an objective standpoint. If you look at the guys they signed, their pedigrees, they won, I think. People have been talking about Chicago, but the thing with the Chicago Bulls is Bleacher Report came out with an article either yesterday or today calling DeMar DeRozan one of the worst signings of free agency. And I half agree, as weird as it is, because I'm not going to talk about the Bulls for too long, but to briefly cover it, the Bulls could do very well and pull off a 5 seed and maybe, make it to the second round. But there's a greater possibility that their objective lack of defense, like a defensive guy who can hold up beyond Lonzo Ball, who really can't stay healthy for the most part. Like they don't really have a guy who can come out and play defense for you. And that's concerning. That paired with the fact that DeMar DeRozan is really not that much of a threat from 3. And all of their starting 5, more or less, with the exception of Patrick Williams, are essentially players who need the ball to be successful. You look at Nikola Vucevic, he needs the ball to be successful. DeMar DeRozan, same deal. Zach LaVine, it's definitely the same deal. And Lonzo Ball, to a certain extent, is the same deal. And it's just going to be difficult, I think, for them to meld and find rhythm over the course of the season. But that being said, today I'm going to focus on a comparison between last year's Lakers roster and this year's Lakers roster. Big question, did they get better? Because last year people thought, they were easy to repeat. Look at the split. Last year at this time, everyone was saying that the Lakers went out and won free agency. They picked up the 2, contenders for 6th man of the year. And it was pretty much a no-brainer that they would whiz through the regular season and then most likely kill it in the playoffs, which it looked like they were going to. If they had stayed healthy, they would have won that series versus Phoenix. They would have probably lost against the Clippers, though, unfortunately, with the way their roster was constructed, and I'll get into that later. But this year, it's a similar deal where people are saying, dude, the Lakers won free agency. It's a no-brainer. Like, they totally killed it. They did everything they have ever won. They're the best team in NBA history. And then simultaneously, they're also a bunch of old geezers who's going to fall apart in the first round, right? And those are the 2 sides of the take. They're a super team 1 second, next second, they're like the oldest and worst team in the league, right? But today we're going to be objective. There's going to be no BS. And at the end of the day, I'm not going to be like a lot of videos that I watched recently where it's like, are the Lakers better? I don't know. Is Russell Westbrook going to be good? Who knows? I mean, if Russell Westbrook's good, then they're probably good. But if he's not, they're not. And that's a non-answer. I'm going to be giving a definitive conclusion in today's episode as to whether the Lakers have gotten better or not. So let's start from the beginning. So the 2020-2021 Lakers lost in 6 against the Suns due to injuries. And the Suns, as excellent of a team as they were, like, it's a really casual take to say, I hate that word casual, but it's honestly is a casual take to say that they were winning the series with a healthy LeBron and a healthy Anthony Davis. I mean, they more or less were abused through 2 or 3 games. And they just let it slip through their hands, through the injuries, through Kyle Kuzma missing shots, LeBron not being aggressive, which it's I believe that it is on him to a certain extent. It is on LeBron to a certain extent that they lost that series. But I mean, he's old. He can't do everything anymore, right? So let's look at the roster. Now I'm going to be going from youngest. Well, no, I'll go in the order that it's listed on Basketball Reference and give an overview of the players. So to start off as a preface, this year's roster, the key idea was to get more offense and versatility in the front court, while also bolstering the backcourt. So firstly, Kyle Kuzma. This is not a new addition, but this was supposed to be, you know, another season. He would adapt more. And to a certain extent, Kyle Kuzma did a lot of things better. His defense was a little better in some spots, but worse, unfortunately, in other spots. His rebounding was a lot better. His intangible game, you know, his presence on the court, I think, though, is one thing that definitely did not get better. This year, when Kyle Kuzma was on the floor, I always felt like it was sort of a vacuum because he wasn't doing much off the ball. He hesitated to shoot. When he did shoot, he generally was not a good shooter whatsoever. To open up his Basketball Reference page and look at the past season, he shot 69% from the free throw line, which is cool, and 36% from three. But that 36% from three is deceptive because he missed a lot of open looks. And to even go deeper into it, if you look at the playoffs, he averaged 6.3 points on 17% from three. And honestly, his defense was atrocious. To this day, Kyle Kuzma in the past season, the 2020-2021 season, played some of the worst defense I've ever seen in my life. I mean, he has a fundamental issue of fouling jump shooters. He always falls for up fakes and head fakes, and any type of move that's trying to trick the defensive player, he just bites on. And on offense, he doesn't bring you much. He's excellent when he's cutting, but he never cuts. He always spots up, which is his main weakness because of his inconsistent jump shot. And Kyle Kuzma in the rotation struggled to find minutes, and there was always pressure on Frank Vogel to find him minutes, and he just did not mesh well with Anthony Davis and LeBron on the court. And that, in part, I think, is he lost them games. His presence on the court lost them games. Now, Talen Horton-Tucker had a phenomenal preseason. You know, he dropped 30 versus the Clippers. He looked dominant. He was dominant. In the regular season, he was interesting because his three-point shooting, you could always count on him to knock down a three or two, but he was anything but consistent. He took a lot of bad shots. And I think his main weakness was when he came in, he couldn't get significant minutes, really, or substantial, meaningful minutes. So he would end up trying to prove himself a lot, which is good. It's what you do as a rookie and a young player. But a lot of the times he was just completely out of control. He would dribble into the lane and do a spin move, sort of lose his balance, and then end up firing off this ridiculous layup or something, you know. And he was great for mid-range for some reason, which I hadn't expected. As an individual defender, he was weird because he has these huge, massive, long arms. But, you know, he never really made that much of an impact. And I think if he does improve on his shooting and his defense in this coming season, you know, he could be better. But, you know, I'll get to the current season later. But he's still in a spot where he's going to be fighting for minutes, and he has to prove why he can be there. And in the 2020 season, he did not particularly show any specific reason to play beyond merely being a threat to attack the rim. Dennis Schroeder. 0 points on 0 for 9 in the playoffs, dude. That's all I need to say. Over the course of the regular season, he played some good defense, not great defense, but definitely good defense. He had good energy. But Dennis Schroeder's main issue is that he took so many off the dribble threes that it made my head want to explode. I mean, offensively, you would have Anthony Davis and LeBron James on the court, and your offense for pretty much an entire quarter would be Dennis Schroeder off the dribble threes at the end of the shot clock because no one ran any plays. And he's a lot like Kuzma, where he was just like a vacuum on offense. He just sucked up minutes and space. And ultimately, his lack of consistency from the three-point line was killer. He'd have weird big assist games, but I never particularly noticed his passing. Um, he brought good energy, but I think at the end of the day, he's just a redundant player on that team of defensive guy with inconsistent jump shot, which I think was one of the things that sunk this team was inconsistency and overemphasis on defense. Uh, Schroeder fumbled the bag, obviously, as we've been seeing in the headlines. I did say Jay Williams said on Twitter that there was never really that 4 years, 84 million offer. That was just sort of like a myth. Regardless, he could have had money from the Lakers, and I'm glad they didn't pick it up because honestly, I have respect for Schroeder as a player. It's just you would always hear him complaining about something, and there was always some like big cloud around him during the regular season about like his contract or his minutes or his role or getting blamed for stuff. He wasn't a terrible fit. It's just he wasn't an excellent fit really either because he isn't that excellent of a playmaker. And his lack of a jump shot really reduced the size of the floor for them. Moving on, Markieff Morris, phenomenal in 2019. Phenomenal. One of my favorite players on the team in 2019. This season, it was so frustrating when he was on the court because he just couldn't make a shot to save his life for some reason. And he lost minutes towards the end of the season. He shot 31% from three on the season, but it felt more like 2% from three. And as a matter of fact, if you look at his playoff shooting splits, shot 66 from the line and 25 from three, and 22 overall from the field. And you just can't do that. After his performance in the finals in 2019, a phenomenal performance as a role player, you can't come out and just fart all over the basketball court with your offense. And look, losing Keith in this offseason was one of my big regrets because he is a dog. Seriously, a dog. He has that energy, he has that tenacity. He's underrated on defense. He's a very good defender. He can play the five in a small ball lineup. He's a good shooter. He's a good mid-range shooter as well. He never really goes inside or gets rebounds, but that's, he's 6'9". You can't expect him to do everything, but I did like him. Although over the 2020 season, he was just terrible and inconsistent. And if you look at these three out of four players I mentioned, between Kuzma, Schroeder, and Morris, they're inconsistent, right? And that's what brought this team down is inconsistent players. They can't necessarily do any one thing specifically. I mean, Schroeder is a slasher, sure, but he can't consistently score. Kuzma can't consistently score. Morris could not consistently make a shot to save his life. Moving on, Alex Caruso, I'm not going to say much because Caruso was excellent in the 2020 season. He knocked down shots, knocked down threes specifically, played great defense. He was perfect for this roster. Moving on, Wesley Matthews. People want Wes back, but in 2020, I hope you remember that this man was worse than 2019 Danny Green. I mean, he, with his family with a gun to their head, and he has to make one jump shot, I doubt he could do it if you give him 20 attempts. I mean, he was terrible on offense. Awful. It was ridiculous watching him miss so many easy looks. And I'm being overly harsh, but honestly, Wesley Matthews was horrendous. I thought he was going to be great when they signed him. His inconsistency paired with just his sheer incompetence on offense. And again, I have respect for Wesley Matthews. He's a vet. He's one of the better shooters of the past couple decades. But man, you cannot shoot 33% from three on easy open looks and not bring any other significant value. I mean, his defense was good, sure, but he never really played enough because he just couldn't knock down a shot. And that's frustrating. It's frustrating, honestly, because Wesley Matthews, as good of a player as he is, as he was, he did not serve a good role on this team for them. Like Morris, like Schroeder, like Kuzma, he just was inconsistent. Now, on the same breath, moving on to Marc Gasol. Marc Gasol did a lot of interesting things for this team. He did a lot of fascinating sort of playmaking out of the high post. I always thought their offenses were the best when they gave the ball to Gasol in the high post and let them run sort of a motion around him with cutters heading towards the basket and just shooters getting open, and he could initiate the offense. And to his credit, he shot 40% from three, although that's a very deceptive number because he really didn't hit a lot of shots, but he did hit some threes towards the tail end of the season. But Marc Gasol constantly complaining about his minutes was one of the most frustrating things this whole year, because it always felt like there was pressure every game to get him minutes, and then he would just get like 90 dropped on his dome by Giannis or something, right? Because he's the only guy in the league he can guard is probably like Hassan Whiteside and Nikola Jokic for some reason. I mean, he can't guard anyone anymore that can move their feet, and it was just disappointing to me because I had hope, but sort of like Schroeder, I just didn't really get the signing. I mean, I got the Marc Gasol signing a lot less than Schroeder because Gasol is just like, this is this unathletic guy who can't really play defense anymore and can only really kind of shoot. And you're dropping him into offense where the bigs are mainly used as lob threats and defenders who occasionally switch out. And he just didn't fit in Frank Vogel's system, and he was inconsistent. LeBron James skipping over him, injury season. You know, what can I say? He was an MVP candidate and Defensive Player of the Year candidate when he was healthy, and when he wasn't, he wasn't. You know, that's all there really is to say. Alfonzo McKinney, he didn't play, but I loved Alfonzo when he did play just because he was athletic and he knocked down shots, man. I would have played him over Wesley Matthews, honestly, if I'm being 100 with you. Anthony Davis, I'm going to give you a very minor rant about him. Terrible, in my opinion, this season is a word that I would use. Terrible in the 2020 season, in my opinion. Awful. I mean, you know, as a star player, you have expectations to knock down shots, but Anthony Davis was not great from the free throw line, which was killer. Lost in games. He had trouble being aggressive inside. Maybe that was because of Dennis Schroeder occupying some of the points and roles of getting to the rim on offense, but AD just did not score enough. His jump shot disappeared for some reason. I mean, he couldn't hit a three to save his life, and on defense, he was just like fine. You know, it was frustrating, but I do anticipate him to bounce back this season. Now, for the rest of the roster, the only guy that I'm going to mention is Andre Drummond, who I was very excited when they signed him. And I'm not going to talk about Andre Drummond for very long because I'll end up yelling, but this dude, he should be out of the league, not even playing basketball anymore. Don't even let him in within 20 feet of a basketball. I have never seen a player have less of an impact on the game than Andre Drummond. Or actually, he had a major impact on the game. I've never seen a player have less of a positive impact on the game. Every single possession that Andre Drummond was on the court, all the opposing team did was run a pick and roll and try and switch. And if they switched, Andre would just drop all the way back, like under the basket, under the baseline. He would drop out of the stadium, and it would just give the guard a wide open look, wide open. And he would foul them every time if they drove to the rim. I mean, this man could not play defense to save his entire family. And his rebounding was like and it was good in spots, but like just didn't impact anything. He was complaining about his minutes, and it's like, dude, take a step back. Like, you suck right now. And again, I'm saying this as a basketball player, but not an NBA player. Like, I'm a basketball player. I'm not an NBA player. I'm not good enough. These guys are a million times better than me. Andre Drummond would 21-0 me on the best day of my life. You know, but honestly, Andre Drummond was terrible for the Lakers, terrible. And for the Sixers, he's going to be terrible because Andre Drummond does not fit into this league's meta really right now. I mean, he can't shoot. He takes up space on offense by trying to drive the ball himself. He can't score. He can't play defense. And it's like, dude, if you don't want to be in a role where you're just doing little spot stuff off the bench, then just go to China or go to Germany or go to Greece and do that, you know, do your star thing there, because you can't be a star in this league's NBA, you know, or in this generation's NBA if all you're doing is doing bad ISOs and dribble drives and missing shots and complaining and fouling. You know, that's not a star player, dude. So look, overall, this year's Lakers team was the number one overall rated defense in the league. You know, Their offense was just bad because of the inconsistency. There are too many guys on this team that just can't do stuff. They didn't really have a shooter. I mean, I just went through all these guys. I can't name beyond LeBron James. I cannot say that any of these guys were good from three. Marc Gasol, maybe, and Ben McLemore as well. I thought was good in his couple games that he played, but Caruso, and Caldwell Pope is the other guy. Caldwell Pope was bad in that season. He had a good shooting season, but like he just didn't take enough shots. He wasn't aggressive. He was okay on defense, but he just didn't take enough shots at the end of the day. He was not aggressive enough on offense. So your only real good shooters were Caldwell Pope, Caruso, LeBron is probably the best out of those guys, and maybe Marc Gasol on a good day. And out of all those guys, you're probably not having all of them on the court at the same time. And if you do have all of them on the court, then your bench is basically no one who can make a shot. And if you want to look at one thing, it's just the lack of offense for this team. So now I'm going to finish out this episode by going over this year's roster. It is TBD on who stays and who goes. There have been talks about signing Isaiah Thomas and James Ennis. I will discuss that if it happens. But let's just look right here at their current roster. So start off on the list, the way it's listed on ESPN, you have Carmelo Anthony. This is a guy who can do stuff. He will do stuff. He will make shots. He will make a lot of threes, and he will make a lot of mid-range jump shots. If you can count on anything at all, you can count on Carmelo Anthony scoring and Carmelo Anthony scoring with jump shots, okay? So right off the bat, you have a guy, unlike last year's roster, who will 100% do something, which is score. Trevor Ariza, I don't like this signing because he doesn't have a good history with LeBron James, and he's old, and realistically, like, he's not a great shooter, even though people want to talk about his jump shot a lot and making corner threes and stuff with Miami. But he's not a shooter. He can play a bit of defense, but it's just a weird fit. And I feel like he's probably not going to be in the rotation. Kent Bazemore, fine, I guess. I mean, he can kind of shoot threes. He's just inconsistent. He's okay on defense. This is a guy that I don't see really getting significant minutes. And if he does, he's probably going to be sort of like Kuzma or Wesley Matthews or Dennis Schroeder, where it's just like a guy that doesn't fit into the system very well as this 3-and-D guy. We'll have to see under Frank Vogel whether bad defenders can just vanish, because last season, bad defenders didn't vanish under his offense. They were accentuated. And on his defense, like Andre Drummond, Marc Gasol, they were exposed on offense, even though those are both bigs. If you want to look elsewhere, I mean, Kyle Kuzma, he's not a big man. He was exposed on offense and defense under Frank Vogel. So I do wonder, some of these guys who aren't good defenders like Carmelo Anthony and, Wayne Ellington, are these guys going to really be able to play? Who knows? Anthony Davis remains. I talked about him later. Hopefully, he has a bounce back year. At his worst, he's a good defender and he can catch lobs inside and block shots. Wayne Ellington, this is a guy who will knock down 3-point shots. He will score. He will hit Buddy Hield, JJ Redick type shots, fading, step back, falling out of bounds shots. He will. It's not if, he will hit shots. So again, this is another guy who can give you stuff on offense, but nothing on defense. Gasol, old, not going to talk about him. Already talked about him. Horton Tucker, if he works on his jump shot, he can be better than Kent Bazemore, Trevor Ariza, and Wayne Ellington, in my opinion, because of his defensive potential. Dwight Howard, yes, sir. Dwight's back. I love this signing. I think this makes this team a lot better because you have a guy who 100% will bring energy. He will bring energy on the court, like Markieff Morris. He will be a dog. He will catch a lob and scream and run back down the court and pump everyone up, and he will play defense. Maybe not on Giannis or, Nikola Vucevic and stuff, but he will still play D. He can guard people. He will, catch lobs, and maybe once the entire season he'll knock down a 3. And this is a guy who's going to be fun to watch, in my opinion. LeBron, old, but probably still an MVP candidate. Who knows? We'll see. The reason I'm skipping over LeBron is just because, who LeBron is, right? You know what he's going to do. He's going to do LeBron stuff. And he fits in this, Frank Vogel defense perfectly. Moving on, Malik Monk. This is a great signing because you have a guy, this is a guy who has not proven that he can do a lot, but at the very least, he's an athletic guy. And at his best, he's a great shooter as well, in addition to being able to play a bit of defense. So it will be very interesting to see how this guy fits in. And same deal with Kendrick Nunn. Kendrick Nunn, maybe less so, because I don't love this signing. Pretty much for the main reason of him having a lot of the issues of the guys in the 2020 roster, like Dennis Schroeder, Horton Tucker, Wesley Matthews. He's just inconsistent. He hasn't shown that he really can do a lot of stuff at like an every night, game to game level, because he'll have probably like 16 points on 3 for 7 shooting. And then like the next night he'll have like 4 points on 1 for 7. And he's just not a consistent guy, although at the very least he will be a guard off the bench, right? And they need that. And then finally, Russell Westbrook. Are the Lakers with Russell Westbrook better than the Lakers with last year's roster? The definitive answer is yes, they are better. Russell Westbrook is not a bum off the street like the mainstream media wants to portray him as. He's not the worst player in the league. He's not washed. He's not this guy who's going to be a cancer to the team, I hope at least. He's a guy who will score at the rim a bunch, but centrally he'll make a lot of excellent passes to shooters and cutters. And this team has a lot of shooters and cutters. Horton Tucker, Malik Monk, to a certain extent, Trevor Ariza, Anthony Davis, LeBron James, though, as well. These are guys who can get to the rim as well as shoot consistently, and Westbrook is going to complement that perfectly. The only issue with this year's roster that I think last year's roster did not have is, what is the rotation? What is the lineup? Because between Westbrook and Davis and sometimes LeBron James, there's like 0 3-point shooting. I mean, LeBron is a good shooter. He's, people want to give him junk about like his 3-point percentage or his consistency. But look, at the end of the day, he's a good shooter. He's a good shooter. Is he Ray Allen? No, but he's a good shooter. Anthony Davis and Russell Westbrook, both those guys are not good shooters. Westbrook, I believe, shot 36% from 3 on catch and shoot 3-point shots. But, he's, what Russell Westbrook does. He's going to take dumb shots. And Anthony Davis is a bad shooter. He can't knock down threes consistently. So it begs the question here of, who do you go with at the 4, or do you run a 5? Do you run a guy like Marc Gasol at the 5 and sacrifice your transition? Or do you run a guy like Howard? Or do you just start AD at the 5, as much as he hates that, and you space out your starting line more? Because these are big questions, right? But if you want to objectively compare, there are a lot more guys who will be good on offense and will knock down shots, and at the price of their defense. But the 2020 roster just lacked consistency, and there was too much melodrama between all of the young players and all of the guys who just didn't really fully buy into the idea of what they would be doing. And this year you just have a bunch of vets who just want to win a championship. And I think at the end of the day, there's going to be games where Westbrook is going to throw down crazy dunks. Dwight's going to catch lobs. LeBron's going to hit a, 40-footer, or AD's going to, spin around and cross a guy up. And there's going to be energy and positivity. And I feel like if you want to look at anything that will bring them to a championship, that is what you look at. You look at the locker room, you look at the energy, you look at the tenacity and excitement and joy in playing basketball. This is what this year's roster has, and this is why that they are better than the 2020 team. With that being said, I'm going to wrap it up there. In the next 2 episodes, respectively, we're going to recap Summer League, and we're going to go over the Portland Trailblazers roster and their future with a very special guest. Stay tuned for that in the next few weeks. As always, I have been your host, KJ, and I am enjoying this. I think it's fun. Even if no one watches this, at the end of the day, it's just a passion project. And if you do watch this and you do bear through all the mumbling and stutters and incoherency in this podcast, thank you. Thank you so much, because, man, I'm a kid from Seattle talking about basketball at the end of the day, and just go live your life, have fun, and hang loose. Adios.